We have known for quite some time that dopamine is extremely important not only for sex and motivation, but also for learning. If you contemplate the word learning for a moment, what kind of feelings and sensations do you notice? Chances are that you associate something rather boring, strenuous, and dare I say anticlimactic. But what's going on? Why don't we feel excitement, curiosity, and wonder instead? According to brain researcher Professor Wolfgang Hüther, our brains naturally associate learning with pleasure. So as children, when we learn and explore the world, we feel joy. But then we go through our educational system, and now the pleasure of learning gets mixed with fear, shame, pressure, and downness. Curiosity and wonder have to take a backseat in a learning environment that's controlled by targets, standardization, and the idea of absorption of knowledge rather than its co-creation. So as adults, when we now have to learn something, our memories play back the emotional content of many frustrated and tedious childhood experiences. In the context of corporate people development, there's good and bad news. The bad news is that many learning interventions treat participants like students, triggering those feelings of frustration and boredom. Consequently, they achieve unsatisfying outcomes for the organization as well as the participants. The good news is that there is a way to create development experiences that are meaningful, exciting, and effective. In this series of videos, I will explore what tends to go wrong and what we can do for more rewarding outcomes. About a year ago, I started to play the piano, and recently an old friend came to visit and sat down at the instrument. She herself had never played before and asked me what to do. So I played some simple chords in the lower register, and she experimented hitting notes on the right side of the piano. I noticed that she had a lot of tension in her hands, and her right pinky finger was raised, indicating even more tension. So I suggested to her to relax her hands and to keep the pinky down. Guess what the result was? She now tensed up even more, trying to force down her pinky. As trivial as this little incident may seem, it reveals an important lesson about learning. Message sent does not equal message received, and message received does not equal outcome intended. My piano teaching example represents a traditional learning approach, where those who seem to know better impart their knowledge to those who seemingly know less. This formula sounds logical, and of course it has its place, but it also misses a few very important variables. Luckily, I caught myself, and instead of secretly getting frustrated about her not doing it correctly and blaming the difficulties on the learner, I switched modes. Instead, I asked, "What's the playing like? Can you do anything so your hands feel as comfortable as possible?" Her hands and arms and shoulders and face suddenly relaxed, the pinky came down, but most importantly, she started to smile. Her technique and her enjoyment of playing had just improved by at least 100% effortlessly. This can make the difference between someone eventually becoming a master at something or failing begrudgingly. The enjoyment drives us to learn, but when external factors poke holes into our motivation reservoir, everything grinds to a halt. Elon Musk commented in an interview once that most schools' approach to learning sounds something like, "Here's some important knowledge, absorb it, it will help you." He argues, and I wholeheartedly agree, that this puts the cart before the horse. We learn best when we have a clear purpose, either in form of an aspiration or a problem to solve. Most people don't touch a book about babies until they are expecting a baby themselves. The problem with many corporate programs is that they assume they know what someone should learn. What I advocate is to assume that we cannot fully know what this should is. On an individual and on an organizational level, we can only take a best guess. We can't know because people and organizations are many times too complex to be understood fully. And even if we could, we then would have to also understand their unique environment structures, which brings exponentially more complexity. Furthermore, our perspective is limited by our own subjectivity. We all have different genetics, biographies, family influences, cultural contexts, aspirations, social circles, tastes, aversions, strengths, weaknesses, and so forth. So getting one person from A to B may require a different path than what somebody else may need. We learn when something is meaningful to us. Things become meaningful if they are relevant to us. We cannot assume what is or isn't relevant to an individual, but we can allow the individual's intrinsic motivation to guide their own learning process. How do you get to Paris? That depends on where you're starting from, what you're traveling with, and whether you want to go to Paris to begin with. I may be able to tell you with the help of the most beautiful PowerPoint slides the world has ever seen about how to exactly and most quickly get to Paris. But if you actually want to go to Vienna, you may not listen to me for very long. Clever ideas and models are not sufficient to bring sustainable results for learning and development initiatives. People development needs co-creation to be truly meaningful. If we identify first what journey someone has already been on, and where they are going, where they want to go, and where they absolutely do not want to go. So work with and alongside the learner and their intrinsic motivation, then the chances of meaningful learning increase exponentially. So principle number 1, learning is a creative act. Start with the learner.